A young firebrand versus a fading legal legend. Millions watched, but no one expected this ending. The moment Levit broke Conway, and changed everything. The lights in the studio were colder than usual. Not dramatic, just clinical. Rows of seats filled early. Most came not for George Conway, the lawyer-turned-pundit whose relevance had withered quietly, but for Karoline Leavitt, the newest name pulsing through the MAGA world. Not a household name yet, but something was building. You could feel it. Viewers at home saw a gleaming set. A circular stage. The name of the show. The Political Arena. Flashing across the lower third of the screen. The most watched political debate show in America, by far. Ratings driven less by answers and more by collapse. And collapse was expected tonight. Karoline Leavitt, 30, carried herself like she'd already won. Former White House press secretary. Now a sharp, ascending political figure with a gift for turning press lines into headlines. She didn't smile much, just enough to signal she wasn't nervous. She rarely was. Across from her, George Conway sat hunched over his notes. His fingers twitched. He had built his reputation on opposing Trump, even while married to one of Trump's closest advisors. But now, he wasn't defending the past. He was defending Kamala Harris, a vice president polling in the low 30s and widely criticized for her absence. It wasn't clear whether Conway still believed in her. But he had taken the role, and the cameras were rolling. No one knew what Levit had prepared. Producers said she wanted no pre-interview. No preview clips. Just the stage. Social media ticked upward as the host walked into the spotlight. Calm voice. No music. Just silence before the first strike. Welcome to the political arena. Tonight, Karoline Leavitt versus George Conway. Two worldviews. One legacy in the balance. Leavitt nodded once. Conway forced a smile. This was not a conversation. It was a trial. And Harris was not the one who would be speaking. The show was just beginning. The opening question was simple. What has Kamala Harris done with the power she was given? The host's voice barely echoed before Leavitt answered. She let it rot. No hesitation. No pause. Leavitt's tone stayed calm, but the words hit hard. Behind her, the screen lit up. 3.4 million illegal border crossings since 2023. A red spike climbing like a fever chart. She was the border czar. That was her title. But when things got hard, she vanished. Scattered applause. Quiet, but present. George Conway cleared his throat. This is cherry picking. The vice president doesn't manage border patrol. That's DHS. She focused on root causes: poverty, violence, migration pressure. He kept his voice low. Almost too low. This isn't fair. Leavitt clicked again. A clip played. Harris, at a Paraguay conference, stumbling through a sentence on immigration. We need a comprehensive framework. The screen froze. Her eyes lost. Her hands mid-gesture. This, Leavitt said, is the policy. The crowd laughed. Not cruelly. More like they'd seen enough to decide. Conway sighed. You're distorting. There was a $950 million plan for regional development. And what changed? Leavitt cut in. Migration surged. Border towns are overwhelmed. But Harris was at the Emmys. Talking about nothing. She stepped aside. A final image flickered, Harris laughing during a radio interview when asked about the crisis. Conway tried to speak. The host motioned for quiet. His hands trembled slightly. She didn't laugh at the crisis. You know that. Leavitt's eyes didn't move. Then what did she laugh at? The room was still. Even the lights seemed dimmer. Online, clips spread quickly. Not just Leavitt's charts, but Conway's silences. On Twitter, Leavitt was trending. On Reddit, Conway's stammering became a meme. The tone wasn't angry. It was worse, disappointed. Inside the studio, Leavitt remained still. Her arms crossed, eyes steady. This wasn't a debate. It was an autopsy. And Conway had no tools left. The main event hadn't yet arrived. But it was already clear who had control of the room. By the third round, the mood in the studio had changed. Applause wasn't random anymore, it followed Karoline Leavitt like a tide. Conway no longer looked like a guest expert. He looked like a man waiting for the show to end. The topic shifted: Harris's leadership during the campaign. Leavitt didn't walk, she advanced. Not a performance, just forward motion. Kamala Harris was given the keys to the car and chose to stay in the back seat. The screen lit up again. She attended just 10 campaign events in battleground states. Biden did 5 times more in 2010. Pence in 2014? Triple her effort. The screen flashed Nevada, Indiana, Missouri, states lost, each marked in red. Not leadership, Leavitt said. Just a name on a flyer. Conway raised his hand halfway. Harris connected with youth, with black voters. She built bridges online, where the next generation lives. You don't measure that with travel logs. But you measure elections with votes. Leavitt replied flatly. The screen turned again. A polling breakdown. Harris lost women under 35 by 6 points. Suburban voters by 12. Silence. No applause. No laughter. Just realization. She disappeared when it counted most. Leavitt said. Leadership means showing up. She didn't. Conway's voice trembled. You don't understand political risk. She faced constant attacks. Limited support. That's the truth. Maybe, Leavitt said, looking straight at him. But Americans don't elect people to explain why they failed. They elect them to lead anyway. He looked at the screen behind her, as if hoping it might change. It didn't. On social media, clips circulated of Conway rubbing his temples, flipping through his notes, whispering inaudibly as Leavitt spoke. Analysts on cable news started rephrasing their scripts. Harris's quiet strength became strategic absence. Leavitt's numbers were being checked, but the narrative had already taken root. In the control room, a producer muttered, "This is the clip." Meaning, this was the moment the country would remember. Not the applause. Not the argument. Just Conway silent. And Leavitt unwavering. The fire had started. But this was where it caught wind. The fourth round focused on justice, Kamala Harris's promise to defend the rule of law. It was framed as neutral. But no one in the room believed that anymore. Leavitt didn't adjust her tone. She didn't need to. She said the rule of law was sacred. She began. But during the most intense legal fights of her term, election laws in Indiana, civil rights cases in Texas, where was she? Behind her, the screen displayed a quote from Harris, 2022. I will never stop fighting for justice. Then beneath it, a list of high-profile lawsuits from the past 4 years. Her name missing from every one. She didn't show up. Leavitt said. She didn't file. She didn't speak. She let others do the work and claimed the credit. Conway shifted, his hands visibly clenched. That's not fair. She met with civil rights leaders, pushed initiatives through private channels. But she never stood in the line of fire. Leavitt cut in. Not once. He raised a finger. She worked inside a hostile system. You know that. She was the vice president. Leavitt said plainly. That is the system. A slow murmur moved through the crowd. Not approval. Not rejection. Just discomfort. Conway's voice lifted sharp now. You think soundbites and absence of filings tell the full story? That's lazy. You're erasing the structural barriers women face, especially women of color. The audience didn't react. Not because they disagreed, but because they'd heard it before. And tonight it didn't sound like a defense. It sounded like a shield. Leavitt stayed motionless. Her voice lower now. Justice demands presence. It demands action. Words don't protect anyone. On Twitter, one clip surged above the others, Conway raising his voice. Leavitt staring, saying nothing, letting his anger hang in the air. Comment sections split. Some said Conway was right to show passion. Others said he cracked. Most didn't care about the moral math, they just saw who stood firm. In the studio, the host didn't even bother calling time. She simply moved toward the next card. Conway's tie had slipped. His eyes looked down now, not forward. And Leavitt? She was still standing. By the final segment, George Conway wasn't arguing. He was reacting. The format hadn't changed. The lights hadn't dimmed. But something had shifted. Even the camera angles began to linger longer on Leavitt. The topic was supposed to be future leadership. But neither the audience nor the host cared anymore. This wasn't about policy now. It was about damage. Leavitt stood still. Her tone unchanged. Her face unreadable. Harris had 4 years. She began. 4 tests. Immigration. Leadership. Campaign. Justice. And she failed all 4. The screen behind her went dark this time. No charts. No quotes. Just 4 dates and 4 headlines, each a reminder. Each a weight. She's not a villain, Leavitt said. She's a vacancy. The audience didn't clap. They just listened. Conway looked up, something sharp in his expression. Not courage, pride bruised beyond concealment. You're a liar, he said, his voice breaking the show's rhythm. You stand there and twist data, distort context, and you call it truth. A few people stirred in their seats. She inspired millions. He continued louder now. She carried more than you ever will. And you sit there smiling, like it means nothing. Leavitt didn't smile. Mr. Conway, she said quietly, I'm stating what millions already feel. They hoped. She vanished. That's not distortion. That's memory. He took a step forward, not threatening, just desperate. You serve Trump. That's all this is. The audience didn't move. It was no longer a crowd. It was a jury. She served herself, Leavitt replied. And now you serve silence. The words hung. No music. No signal from the host. Just Conway, eyes wide, breath shallow, fingers twitching at the edge of his notes. And then he stepped back. He didn't sit. He didn't speak. He just stood there, defeated. Online, the clip spread in minutes. Conway's outburst. Leavitt's reply. Cable anchors called it the unraveling. Some were sympathetic. Most weren't. It wasn't just that Leavitt had won, it was how simply she had done it. Conway had arrived to defend Harris. But now, no one was talking about her anymore. They were talking about him. The stage lights faded, but the silence in the studio lingered. Conway stood there, not moving. A technician signaled to cut the feed. Viewers at home saw a slow pan away, but inside the studio, no one stood or applauded. Leavitt didn't look triumphant. She didn't need to. The damage was complete. Outside, the media frenzy had already begun. Reporters crowded the exit, shoving microphones forward. Questions about Harris barely surfaced. They all wanted reactions to what had just unfolded. Did George Conway lose control? Was this the end of his relevance? Did Leavitt just define the next election cycle? Cable news moved quickly. CNN played the outburst on loop. MSNBC tried to soften it with context, but it landed flat. Fox aired it uncensored, with a banner that read Conway crumbles, Leavitt leads. Even non-political outlets picked it up. Sports commentators joked about it. Pop culture podcasts dissected Leavitt's silence during Conway's rant as a masterclass in control. By morning, polling groups ran overnight focus tests. The results were lopsided. Leavitt's recognition numbers had doubled. Conway's favorables collapsed, even among moderates. A Politico column titled "The Lawyer Who Lost the Room" spread across X. But the moment that shifted everything wasn't online. It was on Fox and Friends, the following day, when Kellyanne Conway appeared live. Dressed immaculately, she smiled with the calm of someone who had seen it coming. George should have known better, she said, brushing hair behind her ear. Defending Kamala Harris in 2025 is like arguing for a VCR in a streaming world. The host laughed. She didn't. And Karoline Leavitt? Kellyanne continued, her tone sharpening. That woman knows how to finish what others are too afraid to start. Across social media, clips of Conway's collapse were now spliced with his ex-wife's commentary. The story was no longer just political, it was personal, cultural, viral. George Conway tried to get ahead of it. That evening, he went on MSNBC. His tie was loose. His voice slow. She's not wrong about everything, he said, then paused too long. But that wasn't debate. That was demolition. The host didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. Some nodded at his honesty. But it didn't help. The consensus was already set. His defense had failed. Levitt didn't respond publicly. Just one tweet: truth doesn't shout. It waits. No hashtag. No photo. Just silence. And yet, it was the loudest thing anyone heard that day. In the days that followed, no statement from Karoline Leavitt appeared. No interviews. No clarifications. Just that one line: truth doesn't shout. It waits. But the aftermath shouted for her. Newspapers from every side covered the debate. The New York Times called it a calibrated takedown dressed as civility. The Wall Street Journal wrote, Leavitt showed discipline. Conway showed nerves. Even NPR aired a segment titled "When Silence Wins the Fight." More surprising were the internal ripples. A leaked memo from a DNC strategy call revealed concern. "We underestimated Levitt's reach," it read. "Her appeal isn't policy, it's posture." One staffer reportedly called her the most dangerous kind of opponent, unshakable and quiet. Kamala Harris didn't comment publicly. Her team canceled a scheduled appearance on CBS that week. Conway declined further interviews. He posted a single paragraph on his personal blog. "I tried to defend someone who had lost the audience. I didn't lose to Levit. I lost to the silence that followed my words." But silence wasn't Levitt's goal. Within 2 weeks, she was on the cover of The Atlantic. The headline, "The Reluctant Flame." Inside, the article described her as the architect of a new political mood, less shout, more scrutiny. Less charisma, more confrontation with facts. She hadn't announced a campaign. She hadn't even hinted. But focus groups in Ohio, Arizona, and North Carolina were already naming her as someone they'd consider voting for, even though she wasn't running for anything. At a town hall in Montana, someone in the back stood up and asked a local representative, "Do you think Levit would run?" The room paused. Someone whispered, "She doesn't need to. Not yet." That was the second moment. Not the collapse of Conway. Not the memes. But the quiet realization that this wasn't just a moment, it was an origin. Levit hadn't just defeated a lawyer on live TV. She hadn't just exposed the vice president's weak record. She had introduced a new standard. One that didn't rely on charisma, slogans, or rage. One that used silence. One that used presence. And in doing so, she didn't end something. She began something. Something the country wasn't ready for, and might not be able to stop.